And welcome to the S&D press conference this morning. And I hand over to our Group President, Iratxe García Perez. And then, of course, there's time for your questions. Iratxe.
Gracias.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you, of course, for being here today in this usual setting. To begin with, I'd like to make a comment about the plenary session, and I'd like to congratulate Manfred Weber for his re-election as leader of the European People's Party. In addition, of course, I hope that Manfred Weber's new mandate as leader of the EPP will be based on European spirit, the pro-European alliance, and defending our common values. What is challenging or difficult is, on the one hand, to call for this pro-European alliance, and then on the other hand, to allow the European People's Party to strike alliances with the far right, those who wish to bring the European project to its knees. Of course, the choice of Valencia as the place for holding that Congress is showing the alliance between the EPP and the far right. Therefore, I think it's vital for us to be consistent when we put messaging out there for citizens. We need to listen to citizens and we need to defend Europe. Europe is defended by placing a barrier, a cordon sanitaire, against the far right. This is something that the EPP and Valencia are not doing. We can think back to the latest agreement struck between EPP and Vox in Valencia, where the agenda is one leaning far right, and it goes against the environmental agenda. It stands against NGOs and civil society, and it goes against all of those values that we believe to be fundamental. As such, despite these best wishes that I direct in his direction at the beginning of this new mandate, I wish that he defends Europe, and I hope that he will be consistent. We will always stand ready to negotiate. But I want to say one thing. Negotiate does not mean abdicating. It does not mean accepting everything that other people impose. We are different. We have different positions on many different policies. And we need to be able to sit down at a table together to negotiate. But we need to be able to negotiate on our word and negotiate policies. I'd like to begin this press briefing by also congratulating the new government in Germany, which has high representation from the socialists in Germany. This is a pro-European government. It's a government with a huge responsibility against the backdrop of these challenging times. And the SPD is aware of this huge responsibility. We hope and expect that this won't just be good news for Germany, but also we hope that this will be good news for Europe. Now, moving on to matters at hand, I want to address a few issues, and then after that, we'll be happy to open a Q&A round. I'd like to start with the issue of this committee of inquiry into NGOs. On Thursday, the COP will decide on this proposal from 200 MEPs on this establishment of a committee of inquiry into financial entities relating to Green Deal. We stand against the idea of holding NGOs responsible for this because there's no reason for investigating behavior from NGOs. Those who are making this attempt is to misuse the instruments within the European Parliament, and it's just one more strategy in this battle to distort the work of NGOs, and it's not an attempt to increase transparency in European Union decision-making. However, we are in favour of full transparency, of course, when it comes to the use of EU funds and beneficiaries, particularly when it comes to private entities. But this proposal for a mandate doesn't talk about that. It just talks about NGO management of funds. There's no need They don't talk about transparency within private entities and lobbies that might have relationships with different MEPs and groups. Why just be transparent with NGOs? Well, this is a clear attempt to attack civil society and one of the fundamental pillars of our democracy. As such, the group's position will be clear and firm on this matter. Moreover, I want to recall that there is a more adequate body to look into alleged cases of misuse and corruption. For example, the EU ethics body, the interinstitutional ethics body that would cover all of the different EU institutions. But the EPP and the far right are standing in the way of the establishment and funding of this body. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how bodies such as the EU ethics body can be allowed to carry out that work. So I think that's a fundamental issue. Of course, there are other key priorities for us. The MFF, the long-term revamped budget for the EU in a changing world. We have managed to strike a good agreement at committee level. It's a proposal that involves new sources of funding and also joint borrowing. That's a key topic for us. And this sets the foundations for a more competitive, resilient Europe while also preserving social justice. A budget that talks about childcare, child guarantee, and this is thanks to the S&D Group's work. I'd like to thank Clara Tavares, our co-rapporteur on this file. I'd like to ask the groups to be responsible, and this compromise that was struck at committee level needs to be agreed at plenary level. We shouldn't enter into the submitting an agreement on amendments that might seek to break the agreement that was struck. And then finally, a few quick points relating to urgency procedures. This week we will see different urgencies voted on in plenary, and it seems that this is becoming normal practice. I'd like to highlight that last week in the COP, and when I spoke to von der Leyen, I mentioned how concerned our group is when it comes to the risk of misusing Article 170, Rule 170, and Article 122 of the TFEU. We need to base ourselves on adequate justification on the need to apply these rules. Abusing and misusing this practice reduces the Parliament's influence as co-legislator, and as such, we have requested an appropriate debate on that topic. Of course, sometimes there are urgent issues, and there we understand why the Parliament needs to trigger the urgency procedure, but there are other files where we have serious doubts about whether they are urgent and whether, in fact, perhaps the attempt might just be to curb this chamber's democratic power. And finally, for those of you I won't see, I want to wish you a happy Europe Day. We're celebrating the 75th year of the Schuman Declaration, which was a fundamental text seeking to boost integration and to set up common values. That's a call to go back to the ideas of our founding fathers and founding mothers. So today and this year, above all, I want to call on this fight that we need to continue fighting, and thank you very much.
I think there's a first question here. Please present yourselves.
Good morning. Oliver Neuern from Politico. So I have two questions. The first one regarding the inauguration of Friedrich Merz as Chancellor in Germany that you already mentioned. So Merz himself said frequently that he plans on taking on a leadership role in Europe, and we make Germany like the kind of informal leader in Europe. And I think like in German discourse it's often portrayed as Europe basically waiting for Germany to take on this leadership role. So I wanted to know what's your take on that. Does Europe need, like Germany, as a strong leader, or how do you envision that to happen? And then the second question on a completely different topic, it's 3 Bulgarian MEPs from ESN, they signed a cooperation agreement with United Russia. What will the S&D do about that? Thank you very much.
Sobre el segundo asunto que...
Thank you. On the second question you've asked me, but I actually don't have information on which I can draw, so I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. Once I have the facts, I could give you an answer, but I would rather know what I'm talking about, so I'm not just going to risk saying something which might not reflect the facts. So I hope you can understand that. On the question of leadership, Europe needs to be a leader on the global stage. Europe needs leaders in order to make that possible. Europe needs to be strong, and we need to have strong leadership within Europe, strong pro-European and collaborative leadership. Therefore, I welcome the new government in Germany, and I'm hopeful that it will prove to be as committed to Europe as it said it is. And I think that that would be something that would be excellent for Europe, a piece of good news. But at the same time, of course, I feel that we need to give ourselves a reality check, because we have to realize that we can't rely on the personality cult of leaders or single leaders in single countries to take Europe forward. What we need is strong collective leadership and clear, focused voices in Europe defending and speaking out for our common values. So we don't want divided leadership. We want strong and coherent leadership across Europe, which comes together to speak out in favour of Europe. So strong and shared leadership is what we need.
We go to the back and then afterwards, Laura.
Thank you, Sophie Dupuis, for context. I have 2 questions. First, again, on Germany. According to you, what will be the impacts of this new government between EPP and S&D here in the European Parliament? Do you expect this new coalition to facilitate the relationship between the 2 groups here in the European Parliament? And a second question, you mentioned the inquiry committee on the NGOs funding. Do you expect an alternative majority between EPP and the far right on this matter during the COP on Thursday? Thank you.
Sobre la última cuestión.
On the final question, I'm not sure whether Manfred Weber in his press briefing spoke on this matter. Today, as the S&D leader, I'm not sure what the EPP's position is when it comes to the matter of the Committee of Inquiry. Of course, it does depend on them as to whether or not this succeeds. Some groups have taken a position against, but we don't understand the EPP's commission at the moment, so things are in their hands as to whether the decision will be adopted or not. When it comes to the new government and if this will make agreements easier within the European Parliament, I've been leader of the S&D group for 5 years, and so for 5 years I've been working to make these agreements possible. And over the last 5 years we've had 2 different governments, in this case 3 different governments in Germany. All 3 have been and will be pro-European governments, and so we need this agreement in the European Parliament. I think that the new German government is good news for Europe because the goal has been reached, the goal of blocking the far right from coming to power in Germany. That was a great risk, a huge threat for Europe. Then, whether or not it makes things easier here, that's the responsibility of those of us in this House. I know that this agreement to negotiate between the 2 political forces, I know there's a specific paragraph relating to Europe, and there is a reference to holding up this cordon sanitaire against the far right here in Brussels as well. And our group will make good on that promise. Have no doubt we will stick to this. So we expect that the other side will also agree to this. And I want to emphasize that it's the EPP's responsibility to decide whether they get involved and sit down to negotiate, not imposing their views or negotiating with us, or whether they take the easy route to scoop up the far-right votes to create a different type of alliance. I hope that the EPP will be responsible on this point. They have been a force and a political family that built Europe and that built European alliances over so many years, hand in hand with S&D. So I hope that they will continue in the same vein with that responsibility in mind.
Please.
Hola, Iratxe. Laura Zornoza para EFE.
Thank you, Iratxe. Tomorrow we're going to see a debate here about the blackout in Spain and Portugal last week. So I would like to know what your approach is going to be. What sort of message do you hope to convey? Obviously, there's a danger of accusations being brought about how the government responded and how the energy companies responded and what the implications are at European level. Thank you. Well, our message is, of course, European par excellence. What we feel is that we need to find a solution to the problems experienced by the citizens. That's what we need to learn from this. So if the debate focuses on what Europe should do in terms of achieving strategic autonomy in energy and how we can best cooperate across Europe in order to achieve that, then that will be useful. And that is what we hope to see tomorrow, a useful debate. But of course, if there are those, and there could be, people who wish to turn this into a national debate to attack a government with a focus on one specific problem which arose because one government was overwhelmed by a few seconds of unpredicted disaster, then this would be very unfortunate. If they're going to use that as a pretext for attacking the Spanish government and renewable energies, this is not something that the socialists will possibly conceive going along with. So we want to see a debate which is useful for the citizens of Europe. We don't want to see a debate which is just exploited to launch attacks against one government which has experienced difficulties. In moments of difficulty, you need to have governments of conviction and you need to have oppositions which are constructive rather than destructive.
Yes, final question, please.
Buenos días, Tomás Galabotti de la agencia de prensa de Anacronos, agencia de prensa italiana. Es una pregunta.
Thank you. I have a question relating to the Democratic Party, the main delegation within the group, because on several important occasions, the majority of the PD MEPs voted against the group line relating to common defence within the EU. Perhaps that could be explained by the fact that they're in opposition and it's normal to have certain differences. But do you think that these differences are normal, or do you think there's a problem within the group relating to the political line? Thank you. Well, the political group has no internal problems when it comes to defining our strategy, our priorities and our values. We do have a common position. These are not difficulties that cannot be overcome. These differences can be overcome. We have had important debates with different positions among different delegations on this matter and on other matters as well. But what I want to say is that I am very happy and proud of the responsibility that our political group is showing in many of the different decisions that we are making. And I think that we are setting the example of how we should act, taking into account different viewpoints to strike a common position. For example, relating to the MFF, the position there enjoys full support of our group. And even when it comes to the EDIP report, the European Defence Industry Programme, there was a unanimous vote from our political group, which is something that cannot be said for other groups like the EPP. So I have no concerns on this. We are respecting different viewpoints, but we try to make sure that despite these, we're able to act unanimously.
Perez, and thank you to all. Have a good week and see you soon. Merci.